What do we do when we realize that one of our brothers or sisters is going the opposite direction? Now, what I want to look at this morning is a text from the book of Genesis where I think we see this happening with Abraham and his nephew. Now, the last time, it's been a while. It's been a really long while since we were in Genesis, but we're finally coming back to it, which I know excites you all. We're finally back in Genesis. We're in Genesis 14, Genesis chapter 14. And the most recent events that have happened are going to really change how we look at what happens here in chapter 14. In order to refresh your memory, I want us to think back to what happens in chapter 12. At the beginning of Genesis chapter 12, God calls Abram out of the land of his fathers. He calls him out of his father's household, out from that culture, out from pagan worship, out from Mesopotamia and into the land of Canaan. Now, he doesn't tell him he's going to be going into Canaan at first. He beckons for Abram to follow him where he leads and to go to the place that he will show him. And he beckons for Abram to put his faith and trust in him. And shockingly, Abram does this. I say shockingly because that's not an easy thing to do. You know, we read it and we're like, oh yeah, Abram's the father of the faith. What else would he do? But that's not really an easy thing for him to do. But he does it. He does it. And he takes himself, he takes his wife, he takes his household, and he takes his brother's son, Lot. Now, Lot is kind of an interesting character because Abram doesn't have any children. He doesn't have an heir for his family inheritance. And Abram is a pretty old man at this point. Well, I probably shouldn't say that. That might be a little rude. He's 75. He's an older man for having children, okay? It's not something he's expecting to do at this point. And so bringing Lot along kind of clues us in that he's kind of making Lot his successor. Lot is going to be his heir. So he brings Lot along with him, and they come into the land, and we don't really get a lot of information about Lot. We don't really know what kind of person he is. But the first story we get about Abram, he's still Abram at this point, is that after he comes into the land, that a famine strikes. And in response to that famine, Abram's faith wavers. And instead of doing what God had called him to do, and to stay in the land, and staying in the land, he takes a detour down to the land of Egypt, because Egypt never runs out of food, or that's the idea, right? Egypt is the United States of the ancient world. You know, everyone is able to lean on the United States for economic and agricultural stability during, in our age. Well, back then, the nation that everyone leaned on during hard times was the nation of Egypt. And so Abram goes into the land of Egypt. But we find this really strange story here. In Genesis chapter 12, start in verse 11. It says, "It happened as he drew near to entering Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, 'Now behold, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and it will be that when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, "This is his wife." They will kill me, but let you live. Please say you are my sister, so it may go well with me because of you, and I may live on account of you.'" Now, this sounds strange, but kind of understandable at first. I mean, it sounds like he's just worried about his life. You know, he doesn't want to die. Okay. But if you look at what happens next, it sounds like there's more to it than him just being concerned about his life. Look at verse 14. It happened when Abram came into Egypt. The Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And Pharaoh's officials, how do they end up in front of Pharaoh's officials? Pharaoh's officials saw her, praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. This is the richest, most powerful man in the entire world. And somehow he takes interest in Abram's wife and brings her into his own household. Therefore, verse 16, he treated Abram well because of her. And sheep and oxen and donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels came into his possession. This is a dowry payment. He's paying Abram, because if they're brother and sister, then Abram is the one who's supposed to receive the dowry payment. We don't do marriages like this anymore, but it's still common in the Middle East to this day. There's this dowry payment, and so the man who is taking the woman to be his wife will make this payment to, make up for the loss of the daughter, usually to the woman's father. Well, if her father is dead, then the payment will be made to her brother. So, if I'm seeing what's happening here, this sounds like a con. Abram knows exactly what he's doing. He goes along with it, and this seems to be exactly what he's going for. He never says, "Oh no, this has been totally misunderstood." He doesn't say, "Oh no, actually that's my wife, don't take her." No, he lets this happen. He goes along with it, and he comes out with all these riches. And of course, after this, things get resolved, and he gets his wife back, but he still keeps the dowry payment. It's like it's kind of like an engagement ring. Once it's been given, it's been given. Well, he leaves Egypt, and he's received all these riches. But we see right here, we get a glimpse into Abram's character. He has expressed some trust in God, but he's really not that faithful of a person yet. And I think this is the most important thing about Abram, is that Abram, who is, in our minds, the stereotype of a faithful life. He is the epitome. He's what we strive to be. We look at Jesus and we think, well, I can't do that. But maybe I can be like Abram. Well, I find great comfort in Abram's story, because Abram was 75 years old, and he was not that faithful or righteous of a man yet. Now he grows. When we picture Abram's faith, we picture what happens on Mount Moriah. We picture the time when God calls him to sacrifice his son, and without hesitation, Abraham does exactly what God has called him to do, or he begins to. But that's not who he is right here. He's growing into his faith. That's the kind of person he is right now. Well, we see a little bit of a difference. I want you to notice what direction Abram is going. That's the kind of person he is. But at the end, in chapter 13, you start to see some consequences for his actions in Egypt. 13:6, the land could not sustain them, that's Lot and Abram, could not sustain them while living together, for their possessions were so abundant that they were not able to live together. He's received all these things, and it sounds like a blessing, but we see the dark side of it. We see that really it's a curse. It's a reminder of how he gained those things. And it creates this strife between him and his nephew. And it's so bad they can't even live in the same location. They've got too much stuff. Their herdsmen are fighting with one another. And so they say, we're going to have to separate. That's verse 9. Is not the whole land before you? Please, Abram says to Lot, please separate from me. If to the left, I will go to the right. If to the right, I will go to the left. These are the consequences of his actions. And we start to see a change in his attitude because in verse 18, Genesis 13, verse 18, Abram finally settles down like he was supposed to begin with. And he settles down, it says, by the oaks of Mamre. Mamre is not a city. Mamre is a person. We're going to meet him in chapter 14, actually. The oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron. So he settles near the city of Hebron, in the area inhabited by a man named Mamre. Okay, here it says he builds an altar to the Lord. But now, in chapter 14, I want you to see how much he has grown. I want you to see the change that has happened in Abram in this time. Chapter 14, verse 1. We're going to read through verse 16. It's a little bit long, but we'll come back and explain it. Chapter 14. It happened in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, with Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is, Zoar. All these came as allies to the valley of Siddim, that is, the Salt Sea, or the Dead Sea. Now for 12 years they had served Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. So in the 14th year, Kedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and struck the Rephaim in Ashtaroth-Padan, the Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in Shaveh Kiriathaim, and the Horites in Mount Seir, as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh. They struck all the country of the Amalekites, also the Amorites who were living in Hazazon Tamar, and the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, came out. And they arranged themselves for battle against them in the valley of Siddim, against Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goyim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings against 5. Now, the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell into them, but those who remained behind fled to the hill country. Then they took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed. They also took Lot, Abram's nephew, and his possessions and departed. Now he was living in Sodom. Then a fugitive came and told, told Abram the Hebrew. Now he was dwelling by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and these were in a covenant with Abram. So Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, and he led out his trained men who were born in his house, 318 in number, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his men against them by night, he and his servants, and struck them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. And he brought back all the possessions. And he also brought back his relative Lot with his possessions, and also the women and the people. Now, that's a lot going on, and it might just sound like a mumbo-jumbo of names there. So I want to explain what's happening. We find out in these first few verses that there are these 4 kings who are from Mesopotamia, okay? They're from over here, which is where Abram's from. Abram's from Mesopotamia. There are these 4 kings from Mesopotamia. One of them is the Amraphel, king of Shinar. Shinar is Babylon. That's where they built the Tower of Babel, in the plain of Shinar. So he's from Babylon, basically. And you've got Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, he's kind of the head of this coalition. And he's from a little bit farther east, in kind of the Persian area. So they're from very, very, very far away. They're from the land that Abram left. So there's those kings. And then there's 4 of them. And then there's 5 kings who rule over this little area in the Dead Sea Valley, which happens to be where Lot lives. Abram isn't living there. Lot is. Now, these kings who are over here, these eastern kings, are very powerful. I mean, think how powerful they have to be to rule over, to subjugate these cities that are this far away from them. But they take tribute from them. And one year, it says, in the 13th year, they rebelled. That means they stopped making tribute payments. They were supposed to pay this tax, basically, to these other kings. They stopped paying the tax. Well, they give them a little bit of time. They give them a year. Well, in that whole year, they never pay it. And so they say, all right, we'll go take our tax. So they travel this whole way. They cross over the entire Fertile Crescent, come down through Syria, into the land of Canaan, and they just seize the whole city. At least the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. They seize the whole city. All of the stuffs, all of the non-fighting men, when it says possessions, and all the goods, they're taking more than just foodstuffs. They're taking captives. They're taking slaves. They're taking all the people who live in them, and that happens to include Lot. And they're traveling up north. They're going back home. They're taking them back to make them their slaves. But Abram happens to have an alliance with 3 Amorite brothers, Mamre, Eshcol, and Aner. And he and these Amorites, they take their alliance, they muster up their own armies, and they go north. And as powerful, I love how little detail there is. It just happens. I would love to know how exactly this happens. They just use a night ambush and win over these extremely powerful kings and their strong armies, and they come up and they win this battle. And they recover all of the stuff, and they start coming down. Abram has gone from being the kind of person who, is out to acquire more goods and acquire more stuff, to the kind of person who can make this kind of a sacrifice. That he is willing to travel from his home, where things are going great for Abram. I mean, He's making alliances with the people who are around him. He's settled in. He's growing in his faith. And he's willing to make this sacrifice to go recover his nephew Lot. And he wins this through his faith. We see in the next few verses, he comes across a priest named Melchizedek. Verse 17, after he came back from striking Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, that's Jerusalem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High, and he blessed him. The him there is Abram. He blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Melchizedek speaks this blessing from God and says, God is the one who won this victory for you. You are winning these victories, not that Abraham thought it was himself that was doing this, but you're winning these battles by the hand of God. And then, continuing in verse 20, and he gave him a tenth of all. Again, the pronouns are a little confusing. That's Abram giving Melchizedek a tenth, probably, of the spoils that he had taken. So Abram goes from being the kind of person who will run a con in order to get more stuff, in order to increase his wealth and his standing, to being the kind of person who recovers this vast amount of riches. I mean, it's the entire wealth of multiple cities, gives a portion of it to God. I mean, this is a large amount of money and possessions. But what does he keep for himself? The king of Sodom said to Abram, not that he's in a position to make this statement to Abram, since he lost his battle. But the king of Sodom said to Abram, give the people to me, but take the possessions for yourself. So he says, I don't care. Have all this stuff. Then Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to Yahweh, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, so that you would not say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing except what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me, Enter Eshcol and Mamre, let them take their share. He says, I don't want a bit of it. The men who came with me, the fighting men, they had to eat, and so they've already eaten some of the foodstuffs. The three Amorite brothers who we have this alliance, they can have whatever they want. But as for me, I'm not interested in this. Look at Abram's growth. Look at how he has learned from the sin that he already had in his life. He has seen nowhere, it's fascinating to me, nowhere in this whole sequence of events do we see God rebuking Abram from what he did in Egypt. Pharaoh rebukes Abram because Pharaoh nearly dies as a result of it. But God never actually rebukes Abram. Abram learns this lesson from observing the consequences of his sin. You see this upward track that he's on? God isn't going to tell you every time you sin. He isn't going to reach out and point his finger at the Bible for you to see. You're going to have to do your own self-reflection. You're going to have to look, what have I done? What have been the consequences? Have I been living the way God expects me to? Abram does this, and we see that his character is changing. It's transforming and becoming better. But look at what is happening simultaneously to Lot. Back in chapter 13, when he gave him a chance to pick a different part of the land of Canaan, Lot doesn't do that. Lot doesn't want to pick another part of the land of Canaan. He moves himself out of the land. 13 verse 10. Lot, first notice what happens. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord in the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. The time they had spent in Egypt had instilled in Lot a desire for earthly pleasures. We spent some time talking a few weeks ago about the lust of the eyes. That is what Lot is falling prey to. He is falling prey to the lust of the eyes, that he looks forth, and these are the things that catch his eye. He lets those things capture his attention, and then, sure enough, verses 11 through 13, Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Eastward is, they're already pretty east. He moves himself right out of Canaan. Thus they separated from each other. Abram, by contrast, Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. But we read in verse 13 that the men of Sodom were evil and sinners exceedingly so against the Lord. Lot is willing to sacrifice his integrity. Abram is learning that lesson. That he is no longer, that's what he tells the king of Sodom, I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my integrity to grow in riches and substance. But Lot is. He moves himself he moves, it says he moves his tent as far as Sodom, but by the time we get to chapter 14, now it says 14:12, he was living in Sodom. He's put himself right there in the middle of that situation. He's compromising more and more. And I almost wonder, especially after looking at Habakkuk a couple weeks ago, if maybe God sent these, maybe this was part of God's plan, was for these kings, I guess they'd come this way, these kings to come down and take care of Sodom. But because of this whole situation, they continue. At least it should be a warning sign to Lot, right? But we all know what happens. We can just, it's like you just see the train coming. Because we know that in chapter 19, Lot is still living in Sodom. Unlike Abram, he did not learn his lesson. Unlike Abram, he has planted roots in this wicked city. Unlike Abram, we know this is where this is going. He is going to make family ties with these wicked people. He is going to anchor himself down to them. And while Abram is growing in his faith, Lot's faith is decreasing. And I don't know what has to be going through Abram's mind, because I know he sees it. I've been so blessed especially over the past 6 months, because I've had the opportunity to get to know many of y'all better recently, to see how much some of you are growing, and how much progress, and how much work you are putting into your own spiritual growth. I see the changes that you are making. I see the self-reflection and the meditation. I see your faith increasing. But sometimes you will look around and you'll see, and I really hope this is not, I'm not saying this is true of any of you. I really hope, and I pray that it isn't. But we may look around and see that someone is going in the wrong direction. And just like with Lot, you see the train coming. And unfortunately, there's not really anything Abram can do about Lot. He can't force him to love God. He can't make him trust. He can't make him want to be better. He can't make him value his integrity more than his possessions or his social standing or how the people around him see him. He can't make him change what he values. And unfortunately, the answer here to this question, what do you do when a brother or sister is going the wrong direction? There isn't much you can do. That's not to say there's nothing. There isn't much you can do. Abram continues to set a good example. He helps him. He digs him back out of the situation that Lot has gotten himself into. But Lot is going to make the decisions that Lot is going to make. Lot is going to continue in this way. I think it's interesting that we never once read about Lot building an altar. We never once see Lot sacrificing a portion of the things God has given him back to God. We never once see Lot repenting of the horrible decisions, the sinful decisions that he makes. We never see Lot progress in his faith. We never see Lot winning battles. There are signs. There are signs of where Lot is going. And the biggest and best thing that Abram can do is to grow spiritually himself. And sometimes when we grow spiritually, we leave other people behind. And it hurts. It hurts to grow to the point as you watch friends shrink, where you say, we can't be associated with each other anymore. After chapter 19, you don't ever see Lot and Abram together again. There's no more association. At a certain point, it's not there yet, but at a certain point, their separation is going to become so much that they don't even associate together anymore. And I want you all to know this is not targeted in any way. I'm not aiming darts at anybody. And I sincerely hope this is not true of anybody. But I've seen this happen, and you've seen this happen, where you just watch someone's faith slowly drop away. And it hurts. But Abram isn't focused on Lot. Abram is focused on God. He focuses his attention on how he can grow. He is so zoned in on his own spiritual journey that whatever happens to Lot is going to happen to Lot. It's not that he doesn't care about him. It isn't that he doesn't love him. Please don't misunderstand. That's not what I'm saying. But your own relationship with God is too important. It's too valuable to let others hold your spiritual growth back and to hold you down from growing closer to God and increasing in how much you trust God. Lot's journey here is very reminiscent of what we see in Psalm 1. In the first psalm, we read a tale of two men. Psalm 1. And this sounds a lot like the difference between Abram and Lot. Psalm 1. How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked. He does not stand in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. And in his law he meditates day and night. And he will be like a tree firmly planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season. Its leaf does not wither, and whatever he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so. They are like chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not rise in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous, for the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Lot may not be at the point where we would just say, he is the wicked of Psalm 1. But he certainly is not the blessed man who does not, you may have heard someone point this out before, this progression. That first this man walks in the counsel of the wicked, then he stands still, and then he sits down. That's what Lot does. He looks by, he observes, and then he moves 20 inches closer, and eventually he settles down. That's exactly what this is describing. Abraham does the exact opposite. He plants himself right exactly where God told him to plant himself. And maybe a little bit of mixing the metaphor. But Abram becomes very closely associated with these oaks of Mamre. These firm, stable trees. And Abram himself is becoming a firmly rooted spiritual tree, whose branches and whose children we are if we trust in God and we obey His commandments. Let us be like Abraham and continue to grow in our faith and grow closer to God each and every day. And no matter how discouraged we may be when we see friends, we see Christians who seem to be going the exact opposite direction, and at some point the distance between us may cross so much that we have to have the strength of Lot not to look back, lest we fall as they do. If you have any need, please come when we stand and sing.